Princess Bubblegum adjusts the collar of her lab coat before she opens the door to the throne room. It is not a nervous adjustment. It is the adjustment of someone who has been practicing this exact motion for hundreds of years, smoothing a crease that may not even be there, settling a fabric that already sits flat, performing the small ceremony of becoming the version of herself that her subjects need. The animators draw it as a flick of the wrist, 2 fingers along a hem, a quarter second of screen. Most viewers do not even register. The show does not comment on it. It just lets it happen. The way a long married sigh happen at the kitchen table. The way a parent lets a hand drift to a child's forehead at night without realizing they have done it. Watch her face during that adjustment. There is no expression. That is the point. The expression has been worn smooth. Step in a stone staircase, walk too many times. She is not preparing. She is remembering how to perform the version of preparation she invented for herself a long time in a kingdom that did not yet exist. For subjects who did not, for a body she did not. Think about what that actually means. A small motion, repeated long enough, becomes a piece of architecture, becomes load-bearing. The collar adjustment is not a tick. It is a column holding up a building. This is a video about Princess Bubblegum, and the argument tonight is simple, and it is going to take a while to fully land, so settle in. Sovereignty in the land of Oo is not political. It is not constitutional. It is not contractual. It is not even, in the strict sense of the word, ethical. Sovereignty in Oo is biological. Princess Bubblegum rules the Candy Kingdom because she is the substance her subjects are made of. The Candy people are not citizens of her realm in the way a French peasant was a citizen of Louis XIV's realm. They are not even subjects in the way a medieval serf was the subject of a baron. They are extensions of her. They are matter she organized into walking, talking, frosting-cheeked person, and her authority over them is the authority of a body over its own self. That sounds like a metaphor. It is not a metaphor. The show has been telling you this for 10 seasons. Tonight, we are going to walk through every place slowly, one episode at a time, until the metaphor collapses into the literal, and you cannot unsee. Welcome to Tome. Get comfortable. Let us get into it. There is a moment in season 10 where the show finally shows you the beginning. It airs on the 20th of January, 2018, and it is called Bonnibel Bubblegum, and it is the first episode of Adventure Time's final. The show has been running for almost 8 years at that point. Princess Bubblegum has been on screen for nearly all of it. She has been the scientist, the diplomat, the strict mother, the cold pragmatist, the lover, the cure, the war leader, the gardener, the conscience and the embarrassment of her own idea. And then in the 10th season, 20 minutes long, a flashback episode opens her like a music. A girl emerges. She is small, pink. She is alone, except she is not alone because there is an small dog companion called Lolly and a creature made of grass called Chicle. And the 4 of them are walking across a plain that is the absolute aftermath of a war the show has already named in shorthand for years, the mushroom, the end of the human. The episode does not dwell on the destruction, it just shows the small pink girl sitting in the dirt, picking up a piece of pink material and rolling it between her fingers. She is curious about it because it is the same color she is. The implication is unstated and total. She is made of the same substance as the rubble around. She is not separate from the waste. She is a piece of the wasteland that started thinking. There is a scene in that episode that most people remember as the lighthearted one and then moved. The little girl is making candy people. She does not know she's making candy. She is playing. She is taking sugar and gum and the strange post-apocalyptic dust of a planet that has been broken open, and she is pressing it into shapes, and the shapes are getting up and walking around. There is no ritual. There is no ceremony. There is no incantation. A child is shaping dough on the ground, and the dough is sitting up and asking what its name is. The show treats this with a comic lightness that is, on first watch, completely disarmed. The first candy person who stands up announces with cheerful pride that he is alive, and immediately afterwards something terrible happens to him, and the joke is fast and brutal, and you laugh. But strip the comedic framing. Describe what just happened flat. A child accidentally creates a sentient being out of her own raw. The being asks the universe for an identity, and the being is destroyed. And the child does not understand the gravity of what she has done because she does not yet have the vocabulary for grief. That is not a joke. That is a foundation myth. That is the moment in scripture where the world is made and the first death is recorded and the maker has not yet learned the words for what lost. The show does not comment on it, just lets it happen and moves the plot along. Bonnibel keeps making candy people. She gets better at it. She and her uncle Gumbald build a small society. A village rises. The village has streets and a town hall. Gumbald wants to be in charge. Bonnibel wants the candy. And here is the part that most viewers, if they are not paying close attention, miss entirely. The candy people themselves are not consulted. They wake up. They stand up. They open their button eyes and their gum frosting mouths, and they look around and they ask, what is this place? What am I doing? Who is in charge of me? They ask that question because they were not born in the sense that humans are born. They were assembled. They came online with empty fields where biographical memories should be. First thing they need is a frame, an authority, a person to point at and say, that one made me? That one no. That is the structure of authority in the Candy Kingdom, and it has been there since the very first one of them. The Candy people do not vote their prince, do not consent to her rule in any contractual sense. It cannot predate the very possibility of consent because they did not or she made them. It cannot agree to a relationship that the relationship is the precondition of your existence. A child does not agree to be born to a particular mother. The mother is, in the literal physical sense, the medium of the child. Princess Bubblegum is the medium of the candy people. Her sovereignty over them is not earned. It is constitutive. It is the same kind of authority that gravity has over a falling stone. The animators thread this idea through the entire flashback. Bonobelle touches the candy people. She licks her thumb and smooths their hair. She rolls them in her hands like dough. She is, throughout the early scenes, physically continuous. The visual language of the episode never lets you forget that she and they are the same thing. When she puts her hand on a candy person's shoulder, the pink of her hand and the pink of the shoulder are the same. The line between her body and her subject's body, at first, invisible. And then a war happened internal to the village between Bonobelle and Gumball over what kind of politics. Gumball wants a republic in his image. Bonobelle wants a kingdom that can survive the world that broke. The conflict ends with Gumball accidentally drinking a serum Bonobelle had made for a different purpose, and he reverts into a non-sentient piece of gum. He becomes a piece of furniture, a chair-shaped thing, a familiar object in her castle for centuries to come. Punchcake. The viewer has seen Punchcake for years before they understand that have been looking at her uncle. Sit with that for a moment. First political opponent in the kingdom of candy is reabsorbed into the substance of candy. Even her uncle, even her own family. He is not exiled, he is not jailed, he is not killed in any conventional sense. He becomes part of the material of the kingdom. A political problem becomes a piece of the building. That is not a small thing, it's the whole story. When the kingdom rises, when the great pink walls climb out of the dirt, and the candy people number first in dozens, then in hundreds, then in thousands. Bonobelle is the only thing they have in common with each other. They share her. They share the piece of her that was put into them when she shaped. The kingdom is, in a sense, that is not at all metaphorical, a single distributed body, organized around the brain that originally extruded. There is a moment near the end of the flashback where Bonobelle sits alone, finally, after the war with Gumball, after the village has begun to grow into a city, and she looks at her hand. The animators draw her hands very carefully. Pink, soft, the same pink as the new wall, same pink as the candy people walking past in the background. She does not say anything. The show does not put a thought bubble or a voice, it just lets her look. The camera pulls back. The kingdom is smaller. The wasteland is still vast around the kingdom. And you understand, if you have been watching, that she is looking at her hands the way a sculptor looks at her hands after she has finished a long job. Except the sculptor is also the marble, also the chisel, also the dust that will eventually settle on every surface of the studio. That is where the kingdom begins. That is where her authority is forged, not by election, not by inheritance, not by force, but by the simple physical fact that she is the dough and they are the cookies and the bakery is the world. Once you see it, you cannot unsee. Every later episode of Adventure Time, every diplomatic scene, every scolding, every act of surveillance, every moment of love, and every moment of cold experimentation sits on top of this fountain. She's not a queen who happens to be a scientist. She's a creator who happens to wear a crown. The crown is, in a sense, redundant. The kingdom is already her crown. The kingdom is her body, and she is wearing. There's a scene in season 5 that most people remember as a slightly weird side episode and then moved. Is called The Vault. It airs on the 25th of November, 2013. Story about hypnotism and dream. Princess Bubblegum sleep. There's a monster in her unconscious. She asks Finn the human to help her because Finn is the kind of friend who will agree to walk into another person's mind without asking the right question. He hypnotizes, and instead of finding a single memory, he finds a corridor. Corridor has doors. Each door is a past life. This is the spine, so let us walk through it slowly. The vault established casually, almost in passing, as if the show were not quite sure how big a deal. Princess Bubblegum has had previous lives, specifically lives in which she has worn earlier versions of her own kingdom. The episode visits at least one of these explicitly. We see a young woman named In the Dream, a previous name, with a different hairstyle in a different setting, surrounded by what appear to be early candy. The early candy people, they are simpler, less detailed. As if they are an earlier draft, the young woman is afraid. There's a violence happening that she does not have the tools to stop. The episode lets you sit with this for less than 30 seconds before it pivots to the comic plot. But those 30 seconds are doing more work than almost any 30 seconds. Strip the frame, describe it flat. Princess Bubblegum has lived before. The Candy Kingdom has existed before, in earlier forms, with earlier subjects, made by an earlier her. The current kingdom is one iteration of an ongoing project. The current Candy people are the latest generation of a biological line that traces, every time, back to a bubblegum. The dream corridor is not a metaphor for inherited trauma. It is a literal representation of repeated incarnation. Princess of the Candy Kingdom is not the same person who founded the Candy Kingdom in the strict philosophical sense, but she is the same substance. Continuity is not memory. The continuity is continuity is gum, continuity is the pink. Once that is established, the entire premise of the show shifts. Every joke about how strict she is, every scene where she's overbearing or paranoid or cold, every moment where she seems impossibly old in a teenager's body, sits inside this new frame. She is not a young queen who grew up too fast. She's a recurring queen who has been performing this exact role. across iterations she does not fully remember but cannot help repeating. She has lived many of her own funerals. She has watched many versions of her own. She has, in the only sense the show ever lets us hold, done this before. There is a behavioral read available. The show buries in the texture of her performance. Watch how Princess Bubblegum reacts to cry, not the loud cry, the small one. Candy person break. She stiffens, her face does not move. She turns her head to the medic, or to herself, to the lab, and gives the instructions are crisp. There's no shock. There is no panic. There is rarely even visible grief. People who do not know the show sometimes call this coldness. It is not cold, it is the practice response of someone who has done this triage hundreds of times. The face does not move because the face has burned out the kind of flinch that a normal face. She has run out of flinches. The vault tells you why. Flinches were used up several lifetimes. The current Princess Bubblegum walks around with the muscle memory of every previous, even when the conscious memory is gone. This is where the thesis starts to become unavoidable. If the Candy Kingdom has had multiple iterations across multiple bubblegums, and each iteration produces candy people made of the substance of that iteration's bubblegum, then the kingdom is not a polar human scent. It is a biological, single, ongoing experiment in self-replication, where the experimenter is also the medium, and the subjects are versions of the experimenter that have been organized into smaller, sweeter, more talkative units. Her authority over them is not granted, it is congenital. They could not exist without. Previous them could not. The whole architecture is one long sentence in the language of biology, not law. The animators bury one more detail into the vault that almost no one notices the first time through. When the previous bubblegum dies in the dream, the dust she leaves behind is the same color as the candy current kingdom. The substance does not vanish. It re-enters circulation. The kingdom is not built on her. The kingdom is recycled out of her, generation after generation. The pink is the constant. The names change. The bodies change. The pink is the kingdom, and the pink is the queen, and the pink is, in the most literal way possible, the same pink. There is a moment toward the end of the where the current Princess Bubblegum, having walked through the corridor and seen at least one of her past selves, comes back to herself in the light. She does not say much. She thanks Finn. She asks him not to talk about what he saw. He agreed. The episode ends. The show, in its usual way, never goes back to this moment in the way it deserves. It scatters fragments of the implication across later seasons, but it never sits the audience down and says, here is what the vault means. Here is the thesis. The show trusts you to put it together yourself. And most viewers do not, because the show is too busy being funny and beautiful and adventurous in a foreground that always feels more important than the background. But the background is the whole story. Sovereignty in is not political. It is biological. The princess does not govern her people. She continues them. They are the persistent material output of a body that has been pinkly, stubbornly insisting on its own continuation for longer than any human civilization. That needs to be stated plainly. Princess Bubblegum is the biological infrastructure of an entire civilization. Her rule is the rule of the original cell over the colony of cells it has spawned. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a scene in season 4, in an episode that aired on the 18th of June, 2012, called Goliad, that puts the ethical problem of biological sovereignty without ever giving it that name. The setup is light. Princess Bubblegum has been ill, and the illness has reminded her that she is, even with her science, finite individual who could be lost. She has decided to engineer a successor. A successor is a creature she names Goliad. Goliad is a sphinx-shaped being, large, four-eyed, made of candy material, telepathic abilities that the princess has built into her at the genetic. Bubblegum entrusts Finn and Jake with the early stages of Goliad's training, because she wants the heir to learn from someone other than Jake. Goliad goes wrong. The training reveals that Goliad has, from the very beginning, an instinct toward absolute control. She wants to dominate the candy people, not as a benevolent heir, but as a totalitarian one. She uses her psychic abilities to bend their will. The princess realizes, with the calm horror of someone who has just understood a result in her own lab, that the heir she has built is incapable of the restraint the kingdom requires. She does not destroy Goliad, cannot. Goliad is too powerful, and also, in some sense, the show never names, but everyone watching Goliad is her own. So she does what scientists do when an experiment has failed and the failure cannot. She runs another experiment to balance it. She creates Stormo. Stormo is a second sphinx, also made of her, also psychic, designed to counter Goliad. The two of them lock psychic horns above the kingdom, frozen in eternal mutual gaze. The rest of the show goes on with this floating stone still standoff in the background. There is so much in this, and the show treats it as an A-plot of the week. Strip the framing. Describe it flat. The princess of the Candy Kingdom decided that she might die, and to prepare for that possibility, she manufactured a child. The child was made of her own substance. The child turned out to have the wrong policy, so the princess manufactured a second child, also of her own substance, to neutralize the first child. Both children are now permanently locked in psychic combat in the sky, and the princess goes back to her. Think about what that actually means. This is not a metaphor about parenting gone wrong. This is a literal portrait of a sovereign whose method of succession is not adoption, not election, not even cloning in the modern medical sense, but extrusion. She extrudes air. She has the biological capacity to do it. She does not have to ask anyone for permission. She does not have to find a partner. She does not have to wait for her body to do anything now. She is the natural process. She is the evolutionary mechanism. She is, with a flick of the right pipette, capable of producing a person who will outlive her. And that is the whole game. The Candy Kingdom does not have a line of succession, because the kingdom does not need one in the way human kingdoms need one. The princess can make her successor whenever she chooses. The succession crisis is not when the queen dies. The succession crisis is when the queen, who can produce heirs at will, decides which kind of heir is acceptable. Goliad is a wrong answer to that question. Stormo is the correct. The two of them in the sky are not a tragedy. They are a permanent monument to her willingness to do biology in public, where everyone can see, where everyone can know that the heir of the kingdom is, in the end, a scientific decision the queen makes with her own hand. The gap here is enormous, and the show wants you to feel it. There is the version of Bubblegum, the candy benevolent princess, the wise protector, the mother of the kingdom. And then there is the version of Bubblegum we see in Goliad, the lab tech, the engineer, the unsentimental experimenter who looks at a failed heir and thinks, well, I will need a counterweight. Both versions are her. She is not pretending in either of them. The gap between them is not. The gap is the structural condition of being the kind of sovereign she is. She has to be the loving mother in public because the candy people need a mother. She has to be the engineer in private. Someone has to make the next generation. There is no one else qualified. The show does not condemn her. The show does not absolve her either. The show just lets the two sphinxes hang in the sky forever. Eternal psychic standoff. Two children of the queen, locked in stalemate, visible from any window in the kingdom. They are the most honest portrait of her ethics the show ever gives, not because the standoff is heroic, because the standoff is the consequence of the only kind of sovereignty she knows. She made them both. They are both her, and the cost of her error is suspended above her city, frozen but not forgotten, where she can see it every morning when she opens her curtain. There is one more detail that demands its own attention. When Bubblegum is teaching Goliad, in the early scene, before the corruption has fully set in, she explains the principles of leadership in terms that almost any other show would treat as universal. She talks about empathy. She talks about service. She talks about the long view. She is describing, essentially, how a benevolent monarch ought to think. And Goliad, even in the early scenes, struggles with the empathy. Princess can recite the principles. She can teach them, but she cannot actually transmit them because the principles are not what made her a benevolent monarch in the first. What made her a benevolent monarch was 800 years of attachment to the specific candy people she had specifically made. Empathy, in her case, is not a universal value. It is a localized biological fact. She is empathetic toward her candy people because they are made of her. Goliad cannot replicate that because Goliad is not made of the candy. Goliad is made of bubblegum. Goliad is, in a sense, made of the wrong thing to love them. Sit with that. The princess cannot teach her heir to love the king because her love for the kingdom is not a teachable principle. It is a biochemical fact about what her body and the kingdom have in common. Heir is made of her body, but not of the kingdom's. The heir's love would be inheritance, not parent, and that is the difference. Her sovereignty works because she is, simultaneously, the parent and the substance and the city and the king. Goliad would have been only the king. And only kingness in the Candy Kingdom is not enough. Stormo, the corrective second child, is also only king material, but the show sets up the corrective so that the two of them cancel each other out. The kingdom is not handed to either of them. The kingdom remains with the queen because the kingdom can only be ruled by something that is, in its own substance, the same thing as the kingdom. This is not a show being tidy about its own metaphysics. This is a show being absolutely, almost embarrassingly literal. The animators draw it, the writers write it, the voice actors voice it, and then the network airs it on Cartoon Network at 6 in the evening. And most viewers nod and laugh at the comedy and miss the small print at the bottom of the contract. The contract says, in tiny letters that take 10 seasons to assemble into a sentence, the queen rules because she is the matter, and the matter is the kingdom, and the kingdom is the queen. There is one more thread woven through Goliad that deserves its own slow walk before we move on. The episode contains a small sequence in which Bubblegum, having realized that Goliad's tendencies are dangerous, sits in her lab and works through the night to design Stormo. The animators do not give us a montage of triumphant problem solving. They do not give us a sequence. They give us a tired woman working late, leaning over a workbench, surrounded by the soft glow of equipment, hands moving in the small precise motions of someone who has done this kind of work many times before. The show treats the creation of Stormo as a chore, not a triumph, not an act of artistic vision. A chore. The way you stay up late finishing a load of laundry because the laundry has to be finished and there is no one else to finish it. That detail matters. It tells you that the creation of life, in Bubblegum's hands, is not a sacred. It is, by the time we meet her in the show, an everyday capability. She makes living beings the way other characters make sense. She's been doing it for centuries. The wonder, again, is gone. What is left is the labor. And the labor, in the case of Stormo, is corrective. She is making a child specifically to neutralize another child. She is doing it because the first child cannot be unmade, because the first child is too powerful, because the first child inherited too much of her own potential without inheriting the localized empathy that anchors the potential to a population. Strip the framing. Describe it flat. The queen produced an heir at a certain afternoon. The heir went wrong. The queen produced a counter heir at a certain hour of a certain night. Both heirs are now floating in the sky, deadlocked, unable. The queen returned to her throne and continued the previous afternoon. That is not the rhythm of mythology. That is the rhythm of laboratory. The drama in mythology is in the singular act of creation. The drama in Bubblegum's life is in the next item on the list, because there is always a next item on, and the list has been going for 800 years. There is a scene in season 6 in an episode called The Cooler, which airs on the 20th of November, 2014, and it is the most complete portrait of how the candy people experience their own sovereign that the show ever. In the episode, Princess Bubblegum, faced with a security threat from a foreign, deploys a giant defensive bubble around the kingdom. The bubble is an act of pure protective. She does not consult anyone, does not call accounts. She decides, alone in her lab, the kingdom needs an envelope, and then she puts the kingdom inside the envelope. The bubble works, the kingdom is safe, and the candy people, almost immediately after, hold that contradiction. She protects them. They remove. The political logic of this, in any human kingdom, would be incoherent. A monarch who saves her people from invasion is normally rewarded, not punished. But the candy people are not citizens of a normal kingdom. They are her own substance reorganized into beings, and their reaction to her absolute autocratic act is the reaction of a body to a heart that has decided, on its own, to override the rest of the organism's signals. They reject her. They install a different leader. The kingdom is, briefly, hers no longer. And then the new leader fails, and the kingdom is in danger again, and they come back to her, and she returns. The show does not dramatize the return. It does not give her a triumphant speech. She just goes back to running things, because what the candy people learned in the brief interregnum was not that they prefer a different kind of rule. What they learned is that they cannot, in the long run, be ruled by anyone else. Their sovereignty is not a choice, it is a biological default. They can refuse her in moments of acute autocracy. They cannot, structurally, replace. That episode is a clean experiment. The show puts the variable of consent into the equation, runs the experiment, and shows you the result. In a contractual sovereignty, consent of the governed determines who governs. In the Candy Kingdom, consent is a temporary modulation of an underlying biological fact. The candy people can say no to her for a while. They cannot mean no in any deep sense, because no is not a relationship that her substance and their substance can sustain across long time. They are her cells. Cells can mutiny for an afternoon. They cannot leave the body. The show, of course, does not phrase it that. The show is too kind. The show lets her come back without rubbing the candy people's noses in the inevitability of her return. She returns quietly, the way a parent returns to a house after a child's tantrum has burned it. The house is the same house. The parent is the same parent. The relationship has not changed. The relationship was never up for renegotiation in the first place, because the relationship is what makes the renegotiators exist in the first place. There is an absence in the cooler that is doing a lot of the work. The episode never shows you a candy person, deep level, chosen the new leader over Bubblegum. The new leader gets the temporary office, the temporary obedience, the temporary applause, but no candy person looks at the new leader the way they look. There is a recognition reflex they have for her that they cannot transfer to anyone else. Watch the crowds in any episode where she walks into a room. Watch their eyes. The eyes track her without thinking. The eyes do not track the new leader the same way. The eyes know who they are made of, even when the conscious mind is trying to vote for someone else. The cooler is also a meditation on the difference between care and consent. Princess Bubblegum cares for her kingdom. Cared for it before there was a kingdom. Care for her is not a mood posture. It is a labor she has been performing across centuries. The candy people, in the cooler, briefly try to imagine that care without consent is unacceptable. The show lets them try, and then the show gently shows them the consequence. Without her, the kingdom is not a kingdom. Without her, the kingdom is not even a stable colony of cells. The substance disorganized. The walls lose pink. The streets do not know which direction to face. They need her, not because she is preferable to alternative. They need her alternative left. This is not tyranny. This is also not democracy. This is a third thing, and the show, to its enormous credit, never tries to file it under the human political vocabulary. It just shows you the third. The queen who is the substance that is the kingdom that votes briefly against the substance, and then, finding nothing to vote with, recombines. That is not a small thing. That is a different kind of polity entirely. And Adventure Time is one of the only shows on television that bothered to imagine it in detail. There is a behavioral read available across the cooler that adds another layer to this picture. Watch how Bubblegum behaves during the brief interregnum. While she is technically, she does not protest, she does not rally support. She does not, in any of the ways a human politician would respond to being removed from office, fight to come. She goes about her business. She continues to do small things for the kingdom from outside the formal. She continues to monitor. She continues to be present, in a quiet way, in the spaces that need her. The animators give her, in those scenes, a picture that is almost amused. Not smug, not triumphant, just amused, in the gentle, weary way of a parent watching a teenager rearrange the furniture, and waiting for the moment when the teenager realizes the new arrangement does not work. She does not need to fight to come back, because the structure will return her by default. The candy people will discover, on their own, that no one else can do. They will return to her, not because of any argument she made, but because of the simple physical reality that they are made of her substance, and her substance is the only thing that can hold them together at the level of governance. The show treats this with the calm of a process that has, in some sense, been run before. Maybe it has. The vault hints that earlier iterations of the kingdom may have had similar interregnums, similar rejections, similar returns. The current Bubblegum behaves as if she knows how the experiment ends, because some part of her remembered the same experiment. There is also, hidden inside the cooler, a small theological question the show tells her. If the candy people can briefly reject her and then come back to her, does that mean the rejection was meaningful, or was it just no? Was their no a real no in any morally weighty sense? Or was it the equivalent of cells temporarily firing in the wrong direction before the body restores order? The show does not say. The show lets the question hang, and the hanging is the answer. Hanging is the show telling you that, in the Candy Kingdom, the question of whether the people's choices have moral weight is not the same question it would be in a human. The candy people have feelings. The candy people have preference. The candy people have a brief capacity to reject. The brief capacity to reject does not, in the long run, change the architecture. Architecture is biological. The architecture survives the rejection because the rejection is, structurally, fluctuation rather than the decision was made 800 years in the dust when the first one stood up. There is a scene in season 6 in the 2-part premiere that aired on the 21st of April, 2014, called Wake Up and Escape from the City, that rewards a careful viewer with a piece of architecture that nobody else in OO seems to know about. In the episode, the Lich, who is voiced with reverberant low menace by Ron Perlman, has invaded the kingdom. The princess's response, when the threat closes in, is to lead a small group through a hidden door. The door opens onto a tunnel. The tunnel goes far enough that the show does not show you the end of it on screen. Far enough that, even the next time you watch the episode, you wonder how long that tunnel has been there. The plain statement is this: the princess of the Candy Kingdom built, at some point in her many lives, private escape of government, and never told her subjects. There is no popular knowledge of, there is no contingency plan in the kingdom's civic life that includes the tunnel. The tunnel exists for her and a small inner circle, and only when the existential threat is sufficiently large does she reveal that it has been there. Wait, this is one of those moments where the show shows you, without saying it, the scale of her force. The tunnel is not new. The tunnel was not dug last year. The tunnel has the patina of long which means that in some quiet stretch of one of the kingdom's early ascent, the queen, who governs by being the substance of her people, sat down and decided to build for herself a way, not a way out for them, a way out for her, because she knows something about the kingdom that the kingdom does not consciously know about itself. The kingdom is her body. If her body is destroyed, the kingdom dies. Therefore, the kingdom's safety, in the deepest sense, depends on her own. The escape tunnel is not selfish. It is structural, a secret thread that keeps the cloth from unweaving. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The architecture of the Candy Kingdom is the architecture of a body that has been planning for its own continuous scale. There are visible layers, the streets and the walls and the public-facing science, and there are invisible layers, the tunnel, like the surveillance, like the lab archives that we glimpse only briefly across the season. The visible layers serve the candy people's daily. The invisible layers serve the princess's continuity. And because her continuity is the precondition of their existence, the invisible layers serve the candy people too, even when they do not know about. There is a moment in Wake Up where Bubblegum, walking through the tunnel, is already mentally on the other side of the threat. She is not. The tunnel is a routine adjustment. The way a homeowner might walk through the basement during a storm to check the sump pump. She has lived through more existential threats than the kingdom remembers. She has had to use the tunnel before in a previous iteration. Even in this, the animators give her a posture in those tunnel scenes that is steady and slight. It is the posture of a woman who has done this hallway before, with different companions, in different weeks, across different decades. There is an absence here too. The tunnel is never brought up again with any real ceremony. The show does not show the candy people learning about the tunnel, debating whether their princess should have such a thing without their knowledge, having the constitutional fight that any healthy human polity would have if it discovered the prime minister had a private subway. None of that happened, because that conversation cannot happen in the candy people are not in a constitutional relationship with their queen. They are in a biological relationship. There is no version of their daily life in which they call her into a town hall and demand a referendum. Infrastructure is part of her body. They do not vote on her body. They are her body. This is also where the love for her, on her side, becomes most visible. The escape tunnel is not just self-preservation. It is also the kingdom preservation that requires self-preservation. She built it because she understood the clarity of someone who has watched earlier kingdoms disorganize, that if she falls, all of this falls. So she gave herself a way. The way out is not abandonment. The way out is the only way the kingdom, the mother running in the moment of crisis, is the mother saving the children. The mother, in this case, the cells of the children. The tunnel is the show's most underrated metaphor for everything Princess Bubblegum. Long, quiet hallway under a public building, built in advance, used only when necessary, known only, stretching further than you can see. That is her in architectural form. That is the inside of her sovereign. There is one more layer to the tunnel that is worth slowing down for. The tunnel, in the show's visual grammar, is consistently lit dimly, but never fright. The lighting is the lighting of a place that is meant to be walked on. There are no spiderwebs. There are no signs of disuse. There is no sense that the Queen has neglected the tunnel during the long stretches when it was not needed. Tunnel is maintained. Tunnel is, in the soft sense, ready, which means that on some quiet schedule that the show never shows you, the Queen has been keeping the tunnel ready for a long time. She has been making sure the lights work. She has been making sure the air moves. She has been performing at some interval small custodial labor of being prepared for the next existential threat. That maintenance is one of the most quietly devastating implications of her sovereignty. She does not get to assume that the threat is over. The Mushroom War was 800 years ago, and she still maintains an escape tunnel because the kind of being she is has learned over centuries that another version of the war, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 500, the math does not matter. The tunnel is kept ready because vigilance, for her, is not a temporary posture. Vigilance is the resting posture. The unprepared queen is not, in her experience, a queen who survived. Prepared queen is the queen the kingdom needs. And the tunnel, as a piece of architecture, also reframes everything we have been told. She loves them. She protects them. She is made of the same substance they are made of. And yet, when the existential threat arrives, tunnel takes only her and a small inner circle. The Candy People, as a population, are not in the Candy People, as a population, are above ground, where the threat is. This is not a contradiction of her love. It is a structural feature of it. She cannot evacuate the kingdom. The kingdom is too big. She can, at best, evacuate herself because she is the seed. Because the seed is the precondition of the next kingdom. Because if the seed is destroyed, no future kingdom is possible. The Candy People, in any given iteration, are not the kingdom. The kingdom is the project of which they are the current expression. The seed is the project. The seed has to survive. That is a hard thing to put into words. The show does not put it. The show shows you the tunnel and lets you draw the rest. The rest is the recognition that her love for the Candy People is, in the deepest sense, the love of a continuity for any given expression of itself. She loves the current Candy People because they are the current Candy People. She would also love the next Candy People if the current ones were lost and a new generation had to be made. The love is real. And the love is also, in some structural sense, transferable across iteration. The seed, when it survives, can love the new flowering as much as it loved the old one. That is what the tunnel is for. Tunnel is the architecture of a love that has decided in advance that it will continue past any specific generation it currently inhabits. There is a scene in season 5, in an episode called Goliad's older sibling, that the show calls a different name and treats as a different, which is really part of the same long conversation, where Bubblegum is shown to maintain a network of small Candy People whose job is, essentially, to watch other candy. The Cookie, the Banana Guards, the constant low-grade surveillance of her own kingdom. Most viewers code this as a comic running joke. The Banana Guards are bumbling. The Cookies are nervous. The whole apparatus is so visibly ramshackle that it lands as parody. Strip the parody. Describe it flatly. The princess maintains a constant low-level surveillance of every street, every building, every conversation in her kingdom. She has cameras, agents, listening devices, informant. The Earl of Lemongrab, when he's in the picture, becomes one more variable. Lemonhope, when he appears, is a variable. The relationship between her and Lemongrab specifically, which the show develops across multiple episodes, is the longest running case study the show offers of how she handles a candy person who has gone wrong. The Earl of Lemongrab is one of her own creation. She made him. He is, in the show's repeated visual language, made of her substance, just stretched and curdled into a different shape. He is a brittle, narrow, paranoid being, exiled to a distance where he develops his own kingdom of clones and his own internal political pathology. Bubblegum visits him. She speaks to him. She tries, in her unsentimental way, to fix what is broken in. When the breakage becomes catastrophic, when his rule becomes a danger to his own subjects and to the wider Candy Kingdom, she makes a decision the show treats with the sober horror it deserves, but never fully. She melts him. She melts the broken Lemongrab into a new, larger lemon, fusing him with another version of himself, in the hope that the new fused being will be more stable than either of the original. In any other show, this would be a defining ethical. In Adventure Time, it is one moment in a long arc, treated with the same rhythm as everything else, neither denounced nor celebrated. The fusion is, in plain terms, forced biological merging of two of her own children. She does it because they are not working. She does it because she has the right to do it. The right being grounded not in any constitutional principle, but in the simple fact that they are her substance, and she is the original self. This is where the line between care and surveillance becomes hard to walk in any human framework. From a human political perspective, surveillance of one's own population is sinister. From a parental perspective, watching one's own toddler is loving. Bubblegum is doing both, simultaneously, and the show does not let you separate. She watches Lemongrab because she listens to the Candy People because she made the candy. Her surveillance is not the surveillance of a state with cameras on its citizens. It is the surveillance of a body monitoring its own organ. The show never goes back to the Lemongrab fusion to deliver a verdict on it. The show lets it sit because the show knows there is no verdict available. From inside the human ethical vocabulary, what she did is monstrous. From inside the biological vocabulary the show has been teaching you for 10 seasons, what she did is the only thing she could. The only choice was which children to fall back into the substance, and how and when. The show gives you the consequence. It does not give you a referendum. It does not even give you a clear emotional cue. It just gives you the next episode, and the next, and the next, and across enough of them, the picture builds itself. There is a second small moment here that almost never gets discussed. After the lemon grab fusion, there is a scene where Bubblegum returns to her own kingdom, and she walks among the candy people, and one of them salutes her, and she returns distracted. The animators are doing something extraordinary with her face in that scene. There is no expression on it that we have a name. It is not grief, it is not relief, it is not satisfaction. It is the face of a person who has just performed a difficult medical procedure on a member of her own family and is now walking back into the part of her life where she is supposed to be the cheerful queen. The face is asking her body to remember the cheerful queen. The body, in time, complies. Collar gets adjusted. Throne room door gets open. The kingdom continues. That is not a small thing. That is the practical cost of the kind of rule we have been describing. There's no day off. There is no other queen on call. There is no constitutional buffer between her and the consequences of being the substance of her own subject. She has to absorb everything herself. Surveillance and care, in her case, are the same labor. They cost the same and they look the same from the outside, because from the inside, for her, they are the same gesture. The Earl of Lemongrab's story is also where the show first lets you see, openly, that not every candy person turns out the way Bubblegum had planned. Some of them break. Some of them break the rest of them. Some of them have to be refolded into the substance and re-extruded as something more stable. This is, in any human ethical frame, a horror. In the biological frame, the show has been quietly teaching this is a sad necessity. The show wants you to feel both at once. The show wants you to remember that even the most loving sovereignty can become unspeakable when it is also the only sovereignty. And the only sovereignty is what it is when the queen and the kingdom share substance. There is one further detail in the lemon grab that does not get discussed. Fused, larger lemon grab that emerges from the procedure is not, in the long run, fully stable either. The show comes back to him in subsequent episodes and shows him, in his distant lemon, struggling with the same kinds of internal failures, just at a slightly different. The fusion did not solve the problem. It modulated the problem. It bought time. And when you look at Bubblegum's face in those later episodes, when she is dealing with the latest lemon grab crisis, you see something that the show is unwilling to label, but that the animators draw very precisely. You see the recognition that her interventions are not always, or even often, complete solutions. You see the recognition of a scientist running experiments long enough to know that some experiments do not convert. They just keep going. That is part of being the substance. Some pieces of yourself, once organized into beings, do not become stable beings. They remain unstable. You manage them in iterations, knowing that the management never ends. The Earl of Lemongrab is, in this sense, not a failure on her. He is a permanent feature of the substance. The substance contains, among its possible expressions, beings like him. The kingdom contains, among its possible governance challenges, situations like his car. She has accepted, with the calm of a long-lived experiment, that some chronic conditions are simply chronic. You do not cure them. You attend to. That is the texture of late sovereign. The early sovereign believes she will fix everything. The middle sovereign believes she will fix most things. The late sovereign accepts that she is in a long maintenance relationship with a substance that includes its own pathology. That acceptance is, on screen, very quiet. It looks like the small downward tilt of her head when a lemon grab crisis. It looks like the way she packs her bag for the long carriage ride to his castle without any visible enthusiasm and without any It looks like the way she, on her return, files a brief report and goes back. The kingdom has many fronts. He is one of them. She has accepted the front. She is not surprised by the front is, by now, a piece of furniture in her. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendous. There is one more dimension of Bubblegum's surveillance worth slowing down for, because it sets up the next major movement in our argument, and because it concerns an aspect of her life that almost never gets named direct. Surveillance her is not just observation. Surveillance is, in a slow accumulating way, also memory. Cookies and the banana guards and the cameras and the listening devices are not just gathering present tense information, they are also building an archive is the kingdom's memory. Bubblegum, as the only continuous witness in the kingdom, only being capable of integrating the candy people forget. The candy people are short-lived. The candy people do not have the cognitive bandwidth to hold the kingdom, so she holds it for them. She watches because they cannot remember. Sit with that. The watching is not paranoia. The watching is the externalized memory of a civilization without her would have no memory. She is, in the most literal way, the kingdom's hippocampus. The cookies and the cameras are the synaptic connection. The lab is the consolidation. Every night, in some sense, she reviews what is, integrates it into the long file, and stores the file in a brain that has been running for 800 years. The candy people, when they wake up the next morning, do not have to remember anything from yesterday in any structural way, because she has remembered for them. The kingdom continues, day after day, on her continuous remembrance. That reframes the surveillance. Surveillance, in a human polity, is the state's invasion of the citizen. Surveillance in the Candy Kingdom is the body's awareness of itself. There is no invasion. There is no separate citizen invade. The Candy People's interiors are, in some sense, already accessible to her because she made them, and she is made of the same substance, and her watching is just the ordinary self-awareness of a body whose nerves run all the way out to the smallest finger. That sounds extreme. The show, when you watch it carefully, supports the extremity. The Candy People are not surprised when she knows things about. The Candy People are not outraged when she shows up where they did not expect her. The Candy People, at the deep level, take her presence in their lives as a given, the way your skin does not protest when your blood circulates through it. There is one bubblegum behavior the show repeats across many episodes that fits inside this frame, and most viewers, again, code it as comedic. She frequently shows up exactly when she is needed, at the candy person's elbow, with the right tool, agent, corrective center mouth. The show plays this for laughs. The princess teleporting in, the princess somehow knowing, the princess intervening at the perfect awkward second. Strip the comedic framing, describe it flat. She knew because she has been watching. She had the tool because she has been preparing. She had the sentence because she has been thinking about this candy person specifically in the larger context of the kingdom's need, and she had calculated ahead of time what would be needed at this moment in this person's life. The intervention looks miraculous. It is not miraculous. It is the result of long, patient, distributed observation, integrated by a single intelligence that has the time and the substance to do the integration. There is a long arc across season 7 that puts the loving, caring, scientific side of Princess Bubblegum into its single clear, and it is called State. The miniseries airs across late 2015, the 16th through the 19th of November. 8 episodes back to back, each about 11 minutes long. It is structured as a story about Marceline, who is voiced by Olivia Olson with the particular husk of a 1,000-year-old vocal, and what happens when Marceline asks Bubblegum to remove her vampire. Marceline has been a vampire for almost as long as the show has been telling stories about. The vampirism is part of who she is, how she has stayed alive, in the long centuries since the Mushroom War, while every other being she has loved has gone away. Marceline asks Bubblegum to take it out of her. Bubblegum agrees. Strip the framing, describe it flat. A young queen with a 1,000-year-old immune system uses her bios to extract the supernatural condition out of another 1,000-year-old being, who is also her oldest friend and, in canon, her partner. The procedure works. The vampirism comes out. And then, of course, because this is Adventure Time and not a clinical drama, the extracted vampirism reorganizes itself into a series of vampire enemies that have to be defeated, and the rest of the miniseries follows that thread. The procedure itself is the part that anchors the thesis. Bubblegum's bioscience, which she normally uses on her own creation, on her own substance, is in stakes turned outward and used on Marceline. Marceline is not made of bubblegum. Marceline is made of something far older and far more strange. The fact that Bubblegum's science can reach into Marceline at all is a quiet declaration of how powerful the science has become across the century. The fact that Bubblegum chooses to use the science for Marceline rather than for any imperial expansion of the kingdom tells you something else. It tells you that Bubblegum's love, when it falls on a non-candy being, behaves the same way it behaves when it falls on a candy being. It manifests as care in. This is one of the reasons Marceline matters so much in the Bubblegum. Marceline is not made of bubblegum, and yet Bubblegum loves her with the same intensity she loves the kingdom. That is, on the face of it, a contradiction of the thesis we have been building. If sovereignty in Ooh is biological, and her love is biological, then how can she love a being that is not her substance? The miniseries answers the question with a quiet, Bubblegum's love is not, in the end, only about substance. The substance is the default mode. The substance is how she loves automatically, without thinking, the way a heart loves the body it is in. But she also has the rarer capacity to choose love, to extend it across the species line, to give to a vampire what she gives, fault to a citizen made of her own gum. Marceline is the one being in the show, on whom Bubblegum spends the deliberate, chosen. The candy people get the automatic kind. That distinction matters. The automatic kind of love is sovereign. The chosen kind is private. The candy people receive what she cannot help but give. Marceline has decided both are real. They are different, and the difference is the seam between public life and the private life, the life of the queen and the woman. There is a moment in Stakes where Bubblegum stays up all night there's no romantic music, there's no big confession. There is just a chair, a workbench, a series of small instruments, and the quiet cooperation of two beings who have known each other longer than most species have loved. Bubblegum's hands, the same pink hands that shaped the kingdom in the first place, are working on Marceline's body now, and Marceline is letting her. And the trust required for that is older than most human kings. Watch the scene with no dialogue. Watch the hands remember Marceline. The hands have done this before. Hands have held this body during earlier crises that the show has only hinted at. The miniseries gives you, in a few quiet minutes, a portrait of biochemical intimacy that no other animated show on television has quite mapped. The cure works. Marceline becomes mortal again. Brief. The vampirism reorganizes itself. Two of them, Finn and Jake, and others, defeat the end. By the end of the miniseries, Marceline has been re-vampirified, more or less by necessity, in a way that the show structures as a choice and not a defeat. But the moment that mattered, the moment that the show wanted you to take with, was the lab scene. The hands, the trust, The quiet labor of two old beings deciding what to do with the bodies they have. The show is making a quiet argument here about what bioscience means in Bubblegum's hand. Bioscience, for her, is not a research program. It is not a career. It is not a hobby. It is the form her parent. She parents the candy people through bioscience. She parents Lemon Grab through bioscience, however poorly. She parents, in this miniseries, Marceline through bioscience. The lab is where her love, the microscope and the pipette and the centrifuge are not, for her, instruments of an alien tech. They are kitchen utensils. They are how she makes meals for the people she has chosen to feed. The candy people eat one kind of meal. Marceline eats another. Both are made in the same kitchen. There is a reframe here that, once you see it, changes the whole of. This is not a story about a queen who happens to have a girlfriend. This is not a story about a scientist who happens to rule a kingdom. This is a story about a woman whose love language is biology and who lives in a world that has given her a kingdom, a girlfriend, and a 1,000-year body in which to express that language. The kingdom is one essay in that language. Marceline is another. They are written in the same hand. There is an absence in stakes that is doing real work. The show never shows you Bubblegum questioning whether to do the procedure. There is no moment where she sits at the lab bench and considers the ethics of removing the supernatural from a person who has lived with the supernatural for centuries. She does not deliberate. Marceline asks. She agrees. They begin. The absence of deliberation is itself a piece of characterization. For Bubblegum, when someone she loves asks for a biological intervention, the only question is technical. The ethical question has already been answered upstream by the love itself. She does not ask whether to help. That is the deepest portrait of her ethics the show ever gives. Her ethics is not a deliberative practice. Her ethics is the operating system of a being who has already decided to protect and now spends every day implementing the decision. The Stakes miniseries is also where the 1,000 years of memory between her and Marceline becomes most. Two of them have a shorthand. They have unspoken agreements about whose fault what was. The animators give them a physical comfort with each other that is built out of small detail. Marceline floats slightly above the workbench rather than sitting on it because Bubblegum has, at some point, mentioned that her skirts get caught on the chair. Bubblegum lets Marceline drink the red because she stocked the strawberries specifically for her that you only catch on second viewing. Once you see them, you cannot unsee them. Two of them have been through long, quiet seasons of each other's lives. The show only shows you 10 minutes of any given week. The rest is in the room with them, invisible, audible only to them. There is a moment near the end of the mini where Bubblegum looks at Marceline across a distance, and there is something in her face that the show, otherwise, is famously unwilling to show. It is not the Queen's face. It is not the scientist's face. It is the woman's face. Just for a sec. Just for the duration of one shot. The animators draw it carefully. The body language is open. The eyes are soft. There is a small smile that has none of the official duties of the official smile. It is the face of someone who has, in the middle of a crisis, remembered why the crisis is worth solving. The miniseries does not linger on the shot. It moves on. The shot is there. It has been. And every later moment between Bubblegum and Marceline lives inside the gravity of that single sec. There is another thread inside Stakes that connects directly back to the Bonnabelle Bubblegum origin episode and to the vault. And it concerns the way Bubblegum thinks about death. Marceline has been afraid, across the run of the show, of what mortality would. She has been a vampire so long that the prospect of being mortal for her, a kind of unknown. She asks Bubblegum to remove the vampirism partly because she wants to know what it feels like to be a normal person again. The miniseries lets her have, for a few that experience. It is not a triumphant experience. Marceline finds, very quickly, that mortality is uncomfortable in ways she had forgotten. Pain, fatigue, the specific anxiety of a body that does not heal automatically. Mortality, when she gets it back, it is a condition. Bubblegum, watching Marceline experience more, does not editorialize. She does not say, see, the supernatural was not the problem. She does not say, you should have left it alone. She just observes. She lets Marceline have the experience Marceline asks, and when, by the end of the miniseries, Marceline has been re-vampirified out of necessity, Bubblegum accepts that ending without. The procedure was, in retrospect, not a failure. It was a sounding. Marceline needed to know what more. Now Marceline knows. Now Marceline can return to being what she was. With that knowledge inside, Bubblegum's role in the whole arc is the role of the friend who lets you do the thing you said you wanted to do, knowing it might not turn out the way you imagined, and then helps you put yourself back together when the experiment is over. That is a particular kind of love, and it is recognizably the same kind of love she shows the candy people. She lets them have what they ask for. She watches what happens. She helps put them back together when the experiment goes sideways. The cooler is one example, with the candy people asking for a different leader and getting briefly what they asked for, and then being put back together. Stakes is another, with Marceline asking for mortality and getting briefly what she asked for, and then being put back together. The structure is the same. The structure is the structure of a long-lived caretaker who has learned across the century that the people you love sometimes need to run experiments on themselves. And the role of the caretaker, allow the experiment, monitor the experiment, and clean up after. The miniseries ends with a quiet conversation between Bubblegum and Mark. There is no big speech. There's no kiss yet. There is just two old beings sitting somewhere saying the small things that two old beings say when a chat. Animators draw their postures with the particular looseness of people who have stopped, for the moment, having to perform anything for anyone. The candy people are not in the room. The kingdom is not in the room. Marceline's old enemies. There is just Bubblegum and Marceline, talking quietly about the procedure they have just been through together. And the conversation is in tone. The conversation of two people who have many more conversations like this stored up in their long shit. Stakes, in the end, is the show's clearest argument that Bubblegum's biological sovereignty over her kingdom and her chosen love for Marceline are not intentional. They come from the same source. They are different expressions of the same long, patient, scientific. The kingdom is loved because it is her. Marceline is loved because she is not her. And the love is the more remarkable. The science serves both. The science for Bubblegum is just love with a precise vocabulary. There is a long thread across the seasons that follows Bubblegum and Marceline as a relationship rather than as a friendship. And tonight we are going to walk it from start to end, because the relationship is the second axis of the thesis. The axis that moves through her private life rather than her public one. And you cannot understand her sovereignty without understanding what kind of person she is when no one is watching. There is a scene in season 3 in an episode called What Was Missing, which airs on the 20th of September 2011, and which is the first time the show really lets the audience see something between Bubblegum and Marceline that is bigger than friendship. Plot is small. A door has been locked by a creature that feeds on the things people care about. The characters have to play music together to retrieve the things and unlock the door. Marceline sings a song that is structurally a complaint to Bubblegum. The lyrics, in substance, accuse Bubblegum of treating Marceline like an interruption rather than a person. Bubblegum, listening, looks stricken. The strickenness is the point. She is not stricken because the accusation is unfair. She is stricken because the accusation is fair, and she has been on the inside of it for a long time without admitting it. The episode also gives us the t-shirt. Marceline has been wearing, casually, a t-shirt that Bubblegum gave her years ago. The t-shirt is small. The t-shirt is older than the show. The t-shirt is, in the small economy of objects between two long-lived beings, an artifact of what they had been to each other before the show started watching. The animators put it on Marceline without comment. The fans see it. The show does not explain. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Strip the framing. Describe it flat. Two beings have a history that predates the show. History is dense enough that it leaves objects scattered across both their lives. One of them, when the door is closed and the music plays, sings the other listens, and her face does not move, but her face means everything. That is, in a single 5-minute sequence, the entire structure of how the show will treat the relationship for the next 7 years. Hints, objects, faces, songs, almost no on-screen statement. And accumulating across an unmistakable shape. There is a behavioral read here that the show keeps repeating across seasons. Bubblegum, in scenes with Marceline, does not act the way she acts in scenes with anyone else. The collar adjustment is gone. The royal cadence is gone. The crisp scientific clip of her sentences slows down. She uses fewer big words. She lets her face do more things. With Marceline, she is, briefly, not the substance of a kingdom, just a person. The show does not announce, it just animates. Watch her shoulders when Marceline is in the room. They drop a small, recognizable distance is the whole story. There is an absence here that is just, for most of the show's run, Bubblegum and Marceline never explicitly name what they are. The show, across the years and across multiple writers, declined to put the word into anyone's mouth. There are reasons for that, some of them external to the show, including the well-documented constraints on what could be said openly on a children's network in the early 2010s. And Adam Muto, who took over as showrunner from Pendleton Ward during the 5th season, has talked in interviews about how the staff worked the relationship in around the edges. The result is that by the time the show is ready to make the relationship explicit, the audience has already done most of the work themselves. The audience has been reading the body language. The audience has been cataloging the t-shirts. The audience has been listening to the song. There is a moment in Come Along With Me, the series finale, which airs as a single 44-minute ep on the 3rd of September 2018, where the show finally makes the relationship explicit on screen. Bubblegum and Marceline kiss. The kiss is not a surprise, in the sense that fans have been waiting for it for a decade. The kiss is a surprise in the sense that the show, for 10 seasons, has been so disciplined about implication that the move into explicit canon feels almost like a thunder. The animators draw the kiss simple. There is no big music sting. There is no fireworks, just the kiss. And then the plot continues, because the plot, in that moment, has a lich to deal with and a war to treat. Come Along With Me as one episode, not as part. It airs as a continuous 44-minute event. Rebecca Sugar, who had been one of the show's most distinctive storyboarders before she left Adventure's 5th season to develop Steven Universe, returned to write the song Time Adventure specifically. The song is, in substance, an argument that nothing important is ever truly lost. The people we love continue to be real even after they are gone. Time is not a destroyer in the way the song plays during the climax of the war, and the war stops. The characters listen. The show, at its very last moment of crisis, chooses a song. Inside that finale, the kiss between Bubblegum and Marceline is one piece of a larger statement. The larger statement is that the relationships that have accumulated show's run are the show's true subject. The adventures were the foreground. Bonds were always the actual story. And the kiss, when it finally happened, the show admitting gently that it has known this all along. There is a small but important production history of the relationship that helps clarify why the show is so disciplined about imp rather than statement. Olivia Olson, the voice of Marceline, said in interviews and at conventions going back several years that Pendleton Ward had told her the two characters had dated. The information was, for a long time, paratext rather than text. The show could not, in the early seasons, put the relationship on screen explicit. The network had limits. The audience expectations had limits. International mark Adam Muto, when he took over as showrunner during the 5th season, inherited this situation and worked with the writing staff to build the relationship inside the constraint. Watch the relationship across the seasons, and you can see the constraints loosening, slowly, year by year. By the time Stakes airs in late 2015, the show is comfortable, letting the two characters be quietly intimate without needing to label. By the time Come Along With Me airs in 2018, the constraints have loosened enough. The production history is not just trivia. It changes how you read the inside of the show. The show was not coy. The show was working. The relationship was real to the writers and the cast for a long time before it was real on screen. The hints were not flirtations with the audience. They were the maximum the show could put on the air at the time. And the writers used the maximum precisely because they cared about the truth. That care is, again, the same kind of care Bubblegum shows the candy people in the lab. Patient, detail-rich. Trusting that, given enough time, the right shape can be assembled out of small. The show, in its production was, in some quiet way, mirroring its own subject matter. Now hold this against the thesis. Bubblegum's sovereignty is biological. The candy people are her substance. Marceline is not. So what is Marceline in the architecture of Bubblegum's life? Marceline is the thing that exists outside the substance. Marceline is the only being whose presence in Bubblegum's life is not predecided by biology. Marceline is the one chosen relationship in a life that is otherwise composed of given relations. The kingdom was given. The candy people were given. The lab was given. Marceline was chosen. That is why the relationship matters so much, structurally, to the portrait of the queen. Without Marceline, Bubblegum is only the substance of her own kingdom. With Marceline, Bubblegum is the substance of her own kingdom, and also a person who has, against the grain of biological inevitability, chosen another person and been chosen back. The choice is the only freedom her life contains. Everything else is the kind of obligation that flows out of being the original. And the show wants you to understand that the choice is not. Two of them have been fighting and reconciling across centuries. They have hurt each other. They have stayed away from each other for long stretches. They have come back. The relationship is not a romance arc in any convention. It is the long, unedited two immortal or near immortal women trying across 1,000 years to remain in each other's life. They have gotten better at it. They have gotten worse at it. They have learned slowly what to ask for and what not to ask. The show, by the time it reaches the finale, has earned the kiss in the way a long marriage earns a small private joke. Joke is small. The history behind the joke is enormous. There is one more detail, and it concerns the song at the finale. Rebecca Sugar wrote Time Adventure specifically for Come Along. The song's argument, in substance, is that everyone who has loved you is still real, somewhere, in the structure of time. Not in a vague spiritual way, but in the precise way that a moment of love, once it happens, cannot be unmet. It joins the structure of what has occurred. The song is sung by BMO, voiced by Nikki Yang, as a way of stopping the war. The song works because it is true within the world of the show. The world of the show has been, for 10 seasons, building toward the position that bonds are not time. Bubblegum and Marceline are the central institution. They are the proof of concept. Two beings can stay in each other's lives across 1,000 years. Then time is not the enemy. The song is them, in lyric form. When the kiss happens, in the middle of the last battle, in the middle of time adventure, in the middle of a war that the song is in the process of stopping, the kiss is not a romance plot. The kiss is the show ratifying its own thesis. Bond's love. Substance is one kind of bond. Choice is another. Both are real. And in the case of the Queen of the Candy King, both are present in the same person, and the same person is held together by them. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is also a particular reading available across the run of Bubblegum and Marceline together that connects to the question of what each of them does with their long. Marceline performs hers. Marceline writes songs. Marceline tells stories. Marceline keeps the past alive by giving it form. Bubblegum does the opposite. Bubblegum administrates hers. Bubblegum runs experiments. Bubblegum builds structures. Bubblegum keeps the past alive by absorbing it into the architecture of the present, where its outlines are no longer visible, but its weight is still load-bearing. The two of them are doing the same job in opposite directions. They are both holding the long memory of the world, and they have chosen complementary methods. Marceline's method is expressed. Bubblegum's method is struck. Together, they form a complete arc. Together, they are the two halves of how a civilization with no humans left can remember it. That is part of why the relationship works. They are not redundant. They are not running the same operating. They are dividing the labor of long memory between them by and the temperaments have, over centuries, become specialized to the division. Marceline cannot do what Bubblegum does, and the show makes this gently clear by never asking Kingdom. Bubblegum cannot do what and the show makes this gently clear by showing, in what was missing, that Bubblegum literally freezes when asked to put her interior into a song. The two of them are, in the architecture of the show, the kiss in the finale, on top of being a romantic moment, is also the formal recognition of the structural fact that they have always been halves of the same project of remembrance. There is a slow accumulating weight to being 800 years old that the show, in its quiet way, has been pressing down on Princess Bubblegum's shoulders for all 10 seasons. The show, when it was ready, in the 10th season, in Bonobo Bubblegum, finally let you see the youngest. The show has, in scattered episodes across the run, also let you see versions of her in between. The young woman in the vault, the slightly younger version in flashbacks elsewhere, the version of her at the moment of certain crisis. None of these versions are the same person. They are the same substance. Think about what 800 years actually means inside this show. Adventure Time aired for 10 seasons on Cartoon Network from the 5th of April, 2010 to the 3rd of September, 2020. The creator, Pendleton Ward, voiced Lumpy Space Self and ran the show into the early season, stepping back season. Adam Muto took over as show. The show won 8 Primetime Emmy Awards across its run and a Peabody Award. The show was, by any external measure, a massive cult. And inside, the central character we are talking about tonight has been alive for roughly 40 times the duration of the show's actual run. She has lived more lifetime work has been. That kind of duration does things to a character. It does things specifically to the kind of sovereignty. Most monarchs in the human historical record lived 20, 30, perhaps 50 years on the throne. They had time to get good at the work. They did not have time to outlive the work. After them became someone else. Princess Bubblegum has had time to outlive her own She has watched the candy people she made die. She has made new ones. She has watched those new ones die. She has, in the iterations the vault hints at, watched whole earlier kingdoms wear down and stop. And she has kept going. The plain statement here is harder than it sounds. The cost of being an 800-year-old queen who is the substance of her own kingdom is that you are the only continuous witness to your own kingdom. Candy people forget. The candy people die and are replaced. The infrastructure change. Even the ground level shift. She is the only fixed point. The kingdom rotates around her, and she does not rotate around anything. She is not, in the literal physical, anchored to anyone older than herself. There are no people older than her in her life, except Marceline. And Marceline is not made of her. And Marceline lives elsewhere. And Marceline is not, by structure, available to her in the way subjects are available. There is a scene, scattered across multiple late episodes, where Bubblegum is shown alone in her lab at night. The show comes back to this scene in different forms. Sometimes she is working on something, sometimes she is reading, sometimes she is just standing at the window. The animators give her, in these scenes, a particular stillness that they do not give her elsewhere. The stillness is not boredom. The stillness is not loneliness in the simple romantic sense. The stillness is the resting position of a being who knows she will outlive everyone else in the building. The stillness is what a long-lived person does when there is no one she can lean on for the particular weight This is, by the way, where the love for Marceline becomes most necessary in the architecture. Marceline is the only being in Ooh who can carry, even partially, the weight of being older in the world. Marceline remembers a different version of Marceline remembers the boy who is now the Ice King, back when he was Simon, voiced by Tom Kenny. Marceline remembers the Mushroom War, sort of, in the fragmentary way a child remembers a disaster. Bubblegum and Marceline are the two pillars of long memory in the show. The Ice King is a third, but his memory has been broken by the crown, and Simon, when he is briefly restored later in the run, is a temporary visitor. The two pillars that stay standing across the show are the two women. And the show, by structuring the relationship between them as the show's central durable bond, is acknowledging that long memory needs company. Long memory, alone, is unbearable. The show is careful not to say this explicitly. The show shows it. There is a moment, more than once across the run, where Bubblegum looks at Mars, and the look is the look of recognition. The recognition is not romantic in the small sense. It is the recognition of one long-lived being seeing another long-lived being and registering, oh, you remember the same disappeared world I remember. You have the same kind of muscle in your face that I have in mine. You also know what it is to outlive a generation. That recognition is a form of relief that almost no other character in the show ever gets. Finn does not feel it. Finn is young. Jake does not feel it. Jake is not that old. The candy people do not have the receptors. Bubblegum and Marceline have the receptors, and they recognize each other. And the recognition is part of what holds the queen together. There is an episode that is not about Bubblegum at all, but which speaks to this directly. I Remember You, Season 4, Episode 25, airs on the 15th of October, 2012. The episode is about Marceline and the Ice King. Marceline visits the Ice King, who used to be Simon, who used to be the man who took care of her after the Mushroom War, when she was a child, and the world Ice King does not remember Simon. The crown that gives the Ice King his powers also takes his memory. Marceline tries gently to pull Simon back, cannot. The show ends with a song. The song is, in substance, a letter Simon wrote to Marceline before the crown took him. The letter says, in essence, I am sorry. I am leaving. I love you. To remember me when I cannot remember myself. I Remember You is not, on the surface, about Princess Bubblegum, but it is in the same key as her story. And Adventure Time is a show that puts its episodes in keys deliberately, and you can hear the key by the key is of long life is the watching of other lives go away. Marceline pays this cost in I Remember You. Bubblegum pays it across her whole reign. Simon and Marcy, Season 5, Episode 14, airing on the 25th of March, 2013, Rebecca Sugar's last storyboard, Steven Universe, extends the same key. We see Simon, before the Crown took him, walking through the wreckage of the Mushroom War, holding small Marceline's hand, singing her songs, keeping her alive. The episode is one of the most quietly devastating half hours the show ever produced. Sugar's storyboard work in that episode is some of the most precise emotional drawing in the entire run. Now hold this beside Bubblegum's life. Bubblegum, at roughly the time Simon was holding small Marceline's hand and singing, was somewhere on the same broken planet, doing her own version of the same work. She was making candy, she was building a kingdom. She was, in the same broken aftermath, choosing to start something rather than choosing to surrender. Two of the show's most enduring characters were, in the deep part, both responding to the end of the world by becoming caretakers. Simon, by holding a single child. Bubblegum, by inventing an entire population. Different scale, same instinct, same key. The 1,000-year inheritance, as a theme, is the show's quiet acknowledgement that the people who survive disasters at scale tend to become, whether they wanted to or not, parents at scale. They become responsible for the people who come after, because the people who come after will not have anyone else. Bubblegum did not choose to be the mother of a kingdom. She made some candy people in the dust because she was a child. Candy people stood up. From that moment on, the choice of motherhood was not actually a choice, it was a consequence. She has been living with the consequence for. There is a behavioral read across her late season scenes that this thread illuminates. Watch how she treats new candy people, new ones, recently made, recently discovered. There is no excitement in her face. There is no novelty. There is the quick, practical gentleness of a mother on her 10th child. She has been here before. She knows what the new one will need. She knows more how the new one. The wonder is gone. What replaces the one is a kind of patient, worn effect. That is the texture of long sovereignty. Wonder burns off. The affection deep. Work continues. There is no triumph. There's also no tragedy in the conventional. There is just the long, flat plane of being responsible for something for a very long time. The show does not romanticize that plane. The show does not make it operatic. The show just lets it be there in scene after scene, year after year. Bubblegum at the workbench, bubblegum at the throne, bubblegum at the window of the lab, bubblegum walking the streets at dusk, bubblegum with a hand on a candy child's head, bubblegum, finally, sitting in a small kitchen with Marceline at the end of the run, drinking tea that has cooled while the conversation was happening. The kind of cool tea that is the privilege of a couple who has stopped noticing the temperature because they are paying attention. There is also a thread here about what it means for a single being to be simultaneously the head of state, the chief scientist, the chief medic, the chief engineer, the chief diplomat, and the chief mourner of an entire civilization. In any human polity, those roles are distributed. There is a head of state who is not also the chief. There is a chief scientist who is not also the chief mourner. Roles are spread because no single human body can carry them all. Bubblegum carries, there is no one else qualified because no one else is made of the same substance as the medics are candy. The medics are good at their jobs in their limited domain. But the deep medicine, bioscience that understands what the candy people are at the molecular level is alone. The diplomats are candy people. The diplomats are charming in their limited domain. But the deep diplomacy, the kind that involves negotiating with the Lich and with the Ice King and with foreign sovereigns who have lived as long as hers alone. The mourners are candy. The mourners do their part at the small funerals of their friends. The long mourning, the centuries deep accumulation of grief for every previous generation not make it, is hers alone. She's the only continuous container for that grief. Nobody else has been there long enough to hold it. This is one of the quiet ways the show makes you understand the scale of what she's not a queen in the sense that human queens are queens. She's closer to a redwood, long-lived, slow, standing in one, holding up a microclimate around herself that the smaller, faster organisms depend on without quite understanding. The candy people live in her shade. They do not see her as shade. They see her as the queen. The shade is invisible to them, but she is, structurally, the canopy that keeps their weather livable. Without her, the climate of the kingdom changes. Without her, the rain patterns shift. Without her, the small lives below her branches do not get what they need. That is a hard image to hold beside the joke-rich texture of Adventure Time surf, but it is the image the show, in its long, quiet way, has been. Adventure Time is not, in the end, a show about adventure. It is a show about a few long-lived beings holding the climate steady from them, and about what it. Marceline is one of the bubblegum. Simon, when he was Simon, was a third. The Lich is a perverse fourth. The show maps these long-lived beings against each other and lets you read the difference between them by their relationships to the shorter-lived beings nearby. Bubblegum's relationship is the most expansive. She is the canopy of an entire kingdom. She is, in this sense, the most committed of the long-lived being, and also the most consumed by the commitment. There is something else this 1,000-year inheritance does. It changes the meaning of every small motion she performs. Collar adjustment we opened on, 800 years deep, is not a tick. It is a small ritual, the way humans say grace before a meal even when they are not religious anymore. She adjusts the collar because she has always adjusted. Motion is older than the kingdom in any. The motion connects this version of her to the previous version. The motion is a form of self-recognition. It says, you are the queen, you are the one who walks through this door, you are the one who makes the candy people, you are the substance and the steward and the surveillance, and the motion is a 1-second sermon she delivers to herself every day whenever she opens the throne room. There is also a thread, easy to miss, about how Bubblegum behaves in the presence of Finn the human. Finn, voiced by Jeremy Shadder, is for most of the show a teenager. He has, for stretches of the early seasons, an obvious crush. She is much older than him in any meaningful sense, and the show, to its credit, never plays the crush as anything more than the painful adult it is. She is gentle with it, does not exploit it. She does not return it. She lets him grow out of it on his own, and the gentleness with which she handles his crush. Across multiple episodes, one of the show's quieter describe it flat. An 800-year-old being is the object of a 13-year-old boy's first major infatuation. She knows exactly what is happening. She has, presumably, been the object of similar feelings from other young people across the century. She handles it without harshness, without flirtation, without exploitation, and without any of the cruelty that a person with that much power could easily inflict on a young admirer. She lets him outgrow the feeling. She remains his friend through the whole arc. That handling is, again, the handling of a being with the long view, who knows that the present feeling is a phase, who knows the phase has the patience to let the phase complete itself without rushing. Patience is the texture of long sovereignty in another form. Patience, for her, is not a virtue. Patience is the natural mode of someone who has been alive long enough to know that almost everything, the Candy People's tantrums part, Lemongrab's crises modulate, Finn's crush end, even Gumbald's eventually, after long centuries of suspended animation, finds a moment to surface and then is dealt. Everything moves. Queen moves slowly because she has been watching the movement long enough to know that hurrying does not change the destination changes itself. Her job is to be there when it does. There's a quiet scene in the latter part of the show where she stands in the lab and looks at her hand. The animators have her hold them out, palms up, for a few seconds. Looking, hands are pink. Pink is the same pink as the kingdom outside the window. The pink is the same pink as the candy people walk. The pink is the same pink as the dust in the original flashback in Bonnibel Bubblegum. The dust, the very first version of her, once rolled between her fingers. Curious about what she was made of. Pink across centuries has not changed. There is a related scene a few episodes earlier, sitting on a bench in a small garden inside the kingdom, alone in the late afternoon, and a very small candy person walks by, pauses, and waves at her. She waves back. The exchange takes maybe 2 seconds of screen. The animators are doing very precise work in those 2 seconds. Her wave is not the wave of a queen acknowledging a citizen. It is the wave of a parent acknowledging a child she has not seen since breakfast. The small candy person, satisfied, continues walking. She returns her gaze to whatever she had been looking at before. The small daily thread of the kingdom continue, and nothing about the exchange is large enough to register as a plot. It is just a small piece of the long texture of her life among the people who are made of. That texture is, in the end, the most accurate portrait the show offers of her sovereignty. The big episodes get the dramatic weight. Goliath. The cooler stakes come along with, but the small textures, the waves and the garden benches and the late afternoons and the cooled tea and the worn stairs are where the actual sovereignty. The sovereignty is not in the big choice. The sovereignty is in the unbroken accumulation of small attentions across centuries. She has waved at small candy people in late afternoon light, 800 years worth of time. The wave is a small column. Many small columns make a building. Building is the kingdom. The kingdom is her body. The body waves at itself gently in the late afternoon. And the wave is the kingdom remembering for a second that the queen is the substance. The queen and the citizen are the same gum. Sit with that. Substance is the constant. The substance is the queen, the kingdom, the citizens, the building, the bread, the street, the original dough, and the latest cookie. The substance has been pink since the world ended. The substance will be pink, on the evidence the show provides, for as long as the queen continues. There is no scenario in which the kingdom outlives the queen, and there is no scenario in which the queen outlives the kingdom, because the two are, at the level of substance, the same. Once you see it, you cannot unsee. There is one more episode worth bringing into the conversation, even though it is not on the main spine of, because it sharpens the point way. The episode is What Was Missing, Season 3, Episode 10. It is the source of the t-shirt detail we have already mentioned, but there is another moment in the same nobody talks about, and it concerns Bubblegum's behavior. The door in that episode is a magical door that responds to the things you most care about. The characters take turns trying to make it open by playing music that exposes what they care about. Finn plays a song. Jake plays a song. Marceline plays a song that is, in substance, her complaint to Bubblegum. And then it is Bubblegum's turn. Bubblegum cannot finish her song. The animators draw her with a stuckness that is not lack of skill. She knows how to play. She is shown elsewhere in the show to be perfectly capable of music. She gets stuck in this specific song, in this specific moment, because the song requires her to expose what she cares about. And what she cares about in that moment is, in some sense, the person who has just sung it. The exposure is too costly. Stop. The door eventually opened by other means. The episode moves on. But the moment of her stopping, in retrospect, one of the earliest visible signs in the show, the queen, who normally has perfect public composure, has a private fault, and the fault line runs along Marceline. Strip the framing, describe it flat. The queen who runs a kingdom by being the substance of its citizens cannot, in front of her friends, say out loud what she feels about the one being not made of her sub. She freezes. The freeze is the fault line. The freeze is the show telling you very early, this character has a private interior that the kingdom does not contain. The kingdom is her body. The interior is something else. Smaller, more fragile, more capable of being silenced by social pressure. The kingdom does not silence. The kingdom is her amplifier, but the small, private feeling about Marceline can be silenced by the simple awkwardness of being asked to sing about it in front of people. The contrast between the unstoppable public sovereign and the haltable private woman is a single small moment, the entire dual structure. There is a cluster of late show moments that puts the finishing touches on the thesis without ever announcing them as finishing touch. The show, in its final stretch, lets Bubblegum and her kingdom be slightly more vulnerable than they have been in earlier seasons. The kingdom has had wars. The kingdom has had the kingdom has, in the finale, an existential threat from her own Uncle Gumball, stored from his punchcake form, who has been planning a counter-revolution. The finale brings every thread back together. Gumball wants the kingdom. The leech wants oblivion. Marceline is in the middle of it. Finn and Jake are running point on the resolution. And Princess Bubblegum, in the middle of all of it, is doing what she has always done. She is trying to keep the candy people. There is a scene in the finale where she stands on the wall of the kingdom and looks out at the army that is coming. The animators draw her with a particular weight. She is not panicked. She is not delivering a speech. She is just looking. Behind her, the candy people are moving, getting ready, doing the small, everyday things they do during a crisis, which is mostly running around in cheerful disorder, while their queen handles the act. She looks at them, brief. She looks back at the army. She gets to work. That is, in a small image, the whole shape of her sovereignty. The candy people are moving. She is the one looking. They depend on her without thinking about it. She thinks about them constantly without depending on them. The relationship is asymmetrical. It is supposed to be asymmetrical. The relationship works when it works because of the asymmetry. She is the brain of the body, and the body is alive because the brain is alive, and the brain is alive because it has chosen, in each iteration, to keep the body going. There is a moment near the very end of the finale, after the kiss, after the song, after the war has ended, where Bubblegum and Marceline are sitting together and there is no candy person around, and the queen is briefly just a woman. The show holds on this for only a few seconds. The animators do not draw any expressions that are too long. There is no kiss in this. There is no big line. There is just the two of them sitting, the way two long-lived beings sit when they have, for the moment, nothing. And in the gentleness of their posture, the show is showing you the cost of every other moment. Queenly posture is on hold. The collar is not being. She is, just for this second, allowed to be a kingdom. Strip the framing. Describe it flat. The substance has put down the responsibility, briefly, in the company of the one being who is not made of it. That is the only place she can. The candy people, by being made of her, never let her stop being herself. Marceline, by not being made of her, lets her, for a moment, stop being the queen. That is the structural function of Marceline in the queen's life. Marceline is the off switch for the throne. That is not a small thing. That is the whole story. There is a final scene in the finale that we have not yet walked, and it is the scene that closes the kingdom as body metaphor, the cleanest possible image. After the war is over, after Gumbald has been defeated, after the Lich has been put back into containment, the show gives us a montage of what happens to the character. The montage is long. It is detailed. It moves through the lives of the major and minor characters with a tenderness that almost no other show on television has achieved in its closing minute. And inside that montage, there is a flash of Bubblegum and Marceline, older, sitting together in a small domestic space, in postures that are the postures of two people who have been together for a long time. There is no big declaration, no dramatic music. There is just a small image of two long-lived beings in a small room doing nothing in particular together, old together, comfortable. The Candy Kingdom continues outside. The lab continues somewhere. The work can. For this small moment, the camera shows you the queen at home with the woman she chose. And the show, having shown you this, lets it stand as the resting state. That image is doing something the show has been working to. The image is showing you that the queen, even with all the biological sovereignty in the world, even with the kingdom that is her body, and the candy people that are her substance, still ends her story not in the throne room, but in a small room with a friend. Perhaps it is more accurate to say that the queen ends both. The throne room is also the small room. The kingdom and the small room are not separate. They are the same life, lived in different scales. Bubblegum's life, by the end of the show, is the integration of those two scales. The small room and the kingdom share their substance with each other through her. And she, by simply continuing to live, holds them both. Animators give the older Bubblegum in the montage a face that is recognizably the same. The pink is the same pink. The eyes are the same eyes. There is perhaps small softness around them that there had not been earlier. The substance is unchanged. That continuity across the run of the show and into the implied future after it is the show's final argument about. It does not change in any deep biological sense. It is what she has always been. She is the substance just keeps going. The substance gets older without aging in the human way. The substance accumulates the experiences of being the substance for a long time, and the accumulation looks on screen, a small softness in the corners of the face. That is the only sign of the central. Hold the entire argument in your head for a moment. Hold the small girl in the dust, who is the same color as the dust, rolling pink material between her fingers, accidentally inventing her first citizen. Hold the dream corridor in the vault, live stand in rooms and frighten her. Hold Goliath in the sky, frozen forever in psychic stalemate with Stormer. Both of them her own children. Hold the bubble of the cooler, the autocratic protective gesture that the candy people briefly rejected, and then could not, structurally, refuse to want back. Hold the tunnel beneath the kingdom, long and quiet and pre-existing, the secret thread of her own continuity. Hold the surveillance of Lemongrab, which is also the parenting of Lemon. Hold the lab during state. Her hands are working on Marceline's body in the small hours of the morning. Hold the t-shirt from before the show, the song at the finale, a kiss at the end of the war. Hold all of it together, and the picture is the same picture. The queen is the substance is the kingdom is the people are her, the work is care, care is biology, the biology is governance, the governance is parenthood is, in its rare best moments, also love. Sovereignty in the land of Ooh is not political. It is biological. Princess Bubblegum rules the Candy Kingdom because she is the substance her subjects are made of. She does not stand above them. She does not represent them. She does not contract with them. She is them, organized into a smaller, talkative, frosting-cheeked form. And she is the part of them that has retained continuous memory, even when the continuous memory has been split across multiple. She watches them because they are her. She protects them because they are her. She experiments because they are her. And because no other being in the world is qualified to do the experiment, she mourns them quietly when they break, because they are, and the breakage is her own breakage in smaller form. She loves them automatically, in the way a body loves the parts of itself that work. And she chooses to love Marceline separately, because Marceline is the only being in her life whose love does not flow automatically out of her own substance. And the choice is the only freedom. Hold one more image as we draw the thread. The image is the moment in Bonnibel Bubblegum, where the very young Bonnibel, before she has invented the kingdom, before she has invented herself in any settled way, picks up a piece of pink material of dust and holds it up to the light. She's curious about it. She does not yet know what it is, does not yet know what she is, does not yet know what the relationship between the two is going to become. She is, in that moment, the youngest possible version of the queen, and she is meeting, for the first time, the substance of which her future kingdom will be made. The substance, in that moment, is just a piece of dust. The future kingdom does not exist. The future her does not. There is just a small girl and a small piece of pink, holding each other up to the late light of a broken world, deciding, without knowing it, to become each other. That decision, made in dust, in light, in curiosity, is the founding act of every later thing the show will ever show you. The dust became the kingdom, the girl became the queen, the piece of pink became the substance, and the relationship between all three is the only relationship that has ever mattered in the land of Ooh. That is the whole argument. The show has been making it for 10 seasons. The show does not announce it. The show does not deliver it as a thesis. The show shows it. The show animates it. The show puts it in the small motions, the long silence, unnecessary tunnels, the floating sphinxes, the careful t-shirt. The show trusts you to assemble it yourself. Most viewers do not, because the show is too funny and too beautiful and too adventurous in the foreground for the background to feel like the main event. But the background is the main, and the main event is the queen who is the kingdom, and the kingdom that is the queen. Once you see it, you cannot unsee. The next time you watch any episode of Adventure Time that has Princess Bubblegum, watch her hand, watch the pink of her hand, watch the way the pink of her hands matches the pink of the people in the room. Watch her, in any room she enters, automatically scan the candy people the way a parent scans a playground without thinking. Watch the way her face does not move when something terrible happens to one of them, and notice that the not moving is not coldness, worn down hundreds of years ago, the flinches. Watch her in the lab, late at night, alone, because alone is the resting position of every sovereign whose subjects are made of her own body. Watch her with Marceline, because Marceline is the only. Watch her adjust the collar of her lab coat before she opens the door to the throne room. And remember that the adjustment is not a tick, the adjustment is a column. The adjustment is the daily small ritual of becoming the version of herself that her subjects need to see. The kingdom is built on those small adjustments. The kingdom is made out. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you.